Chapter 25. Show and Tell in the Desert. My mother and father were desperate to do something about my asthma. I had a violent attack just before my bar mitzvah at my aunt and uncle's house in Newton Center outside of Boston. And though they never said anything, I knew they thought I'd never make it and wondered what they'd do with all the friends and relatives who'd been invited. I somehow rallied for the occasion, and things went smoothly at the shul. I knew I had received requisite number of checks, fountain pens, and congratulations. My parents must have been greatly relieved. That afternoon, back at the house, the family gathered. My dad's younger brother, Fred, who graduated from Harvard and was going to study opera at Juilliard, took off his jacket, loosened his tie, dropped his suspenders, and sang an aria, his rich baritone filling every room of the spacious three-story house. I was so proud of him, and of myself, for being the source of the celebration. Fred was 25, only 12 years older, and I remember feeling a special kinship with him. That night, I encountered my father and my uncles Fred and Mickey, my mother's brother, singing in an upstairs bathroom. I'd never seen him like that, especially my father, in shirt sleeves, their collars open, gloriously and innocently drunk. It made me very happy. But the asthma attacks continued after we got home, increasing in severity, and the medication stopped working. They sent me to a psychiatrist. Very advanced thinking back then. An attractive middle-aged woman who suggested I write down everything I dreamed for later discussion. I promptly began to dream about her and her two daughters, whose pictures were displayed on a table next to my chair in her office. But the dreams were so erotic I was embarrassed to dream them, let alone discuss them with the principal participant. Before long, mercifully, the sessions came to an end. Nothing seemed to help. My mother and dad were at their wits' end, and my asthma attacks had begun to dominate their daily lives. Theirs and my kid brother Roy's, who was 4 and needed at least some of their attention. Finally, they decided to send me away to a better climate than Washington had to offer, and began looking for a suitable location. In due course, they decided on the Brandeis School in Tucson, a place highly recommended for kids with asthma and rheumatic fever. I spent my freshman year of high school there, the 9th grade, and for most of the time, I thrived. It was the middle of the desert, a complex, low whitewashed Spanish-style buildings with red-tilted roofs set well back from a paved 2-lane road. There were dips in it every so often to catch the rainfall, surrounded by cactus and sagebrush. I had 2 roommates, Dick Salins from the east and Gene Korn from the Midwest, and we got along famously. Every night, before bedtime, we competed with sit-ups and push-ups, and then, when the dorm noise had quieted down, Gene would sneak out to meet his girlfriend, Mickey Prussia, who was in a matching dorm for girls across the way. Quite pretty and tall, like Gene, and at dances they looked great together. I'm surprised at how readily available these names are after all these years. So immediate and familiar. Our house father and Spanish teacher was tall, lanky, honest-to-God cowboy, C.P. Wynn, who also taught English. Everyone liked and admired him, and his old panel truck, which he outfitted inside like a camper, and which he used for mysterious getaways on the weekends. He taught us how to use a lasso. We practiced on an old barrel he set up for us, and at mealtimes in the dining room, everyone at our table asked for food in formal Spanish. Hágame el favor de pasarme la leche. Mel Moore taught us arts and crafts. He was also a fine painter. He had one scarred ear and spoke with a gentle lisp. He was another favorite, and when the occasion arose, he taught me how to change a tire. Little Miss Himi taught math and science and was full of fun. Mr. and Mrs. Brandeis ran the place from a comfortable 2-story house that was set apart and looked like a hacienda. Their 2 sons lived there, too. Chuck, the oldest, husky and athletic looking, and Paul, who always seemed to duck his head shyly when he saw us. Mr. Brandeis had carefully combed white hair, keen eyes, and strong features. Mrs. Brandeis was straight and tall and stern, with dark hair pulled back. Then there were the Breslas. She was Mrs. Brandy's sister, and they resembled each other, although Mrs. Brandy seemed aloof and stately, and Mrs. Breslau was warm and motherly, short and plump and gray, like her husband. Somehow they'd grown to look alike. Both Breslaus were intellectual and vaguely European. They usually bustled about the place doing something administrative, and Mrs. Breslau was a practical nurse who took care of our rashes, bumps, breaks, and bruises. My impression was that kind and gentle Mr. B devoted himself primarily to Mrs. B and to long walks in the desert. When we weren't in class, we went horseback riding at a nearby stable. Bob Harris owned it. Or swimming at the Hotel El Conquistador, the El Con. Otherwise, the boys took turns cleaning the pigeon coop behind one of the outbuildings, or the burro corral, and fondling Geraldine, a pubescent, willing, and thoroughly sensual nymph, when they could get her alone in the desert. I don't remember what the girls did, but I'm sure they had chores too. I do remember that Dave Rabinowitz had 2 girlfriends, Marcia Radikoff and Elaine Greenberg, one blonde, one brunette. But I don't think both at once. The supply was short, so we cooperated in our courtships, rotating every so often. Most of us were all of 14 or 15. It was 1946. After Jean and Mickey Prussia made out, he'd sneak back into our room and graphically describe their passionate kisses. Mickey's lush breasts and how he was almost always able to cop a feel. Norman Schwartz lived in the other end of our dorm. He was big and strong and got off on challenging practically everyone to a wrestling match at the drop of a hat, despite his rheumatic fever. I took him on once, and he nearly killed me. Life was fine. We heard regularly from parents and other relatives who sent care packages of candy, cookies, and books. My cousin Terry's Aunt Natalie, who was an army nurse, sent me lots of stuff from the PX. Everyone in our dorm shared, except the twin brothers, Sherman and Sheldon, who got mountains of goodies, including bologna, mustard pickle, other delicacies, which they hoarded in large strong box wrapped with a padlock chain. Needless to say, their stuff didn't last long. All we had to do was slip the chain off and plunge in. They finally wised up and ran the chain through the handles, which tended to endear them even less to the rest of us. A special friend of mine was Ron Pose, who was a day student. His family lived in town, where his father was a contractor builder. I don't know why Ron was sent to Brandeis, but he was an important part of my life through the years. He was ungainly in his early teens, and we teased him mercilessly, administering a pink belly as often as possible with hand slaps. When we met later in Stanford, he'd become handsome, and he tried to date Deborah behind my back, possibly to get even for the pink belly treatments. On double dates, he always prided himself on scoring, sometimes waving an ill-used handkerchief triumphantly from the car window as he drove, or attaching it to the radio antenna like a pennant. Later on, when he became a successful psychiatrist and was married to Philippa, whom we liked very much, we saw a good deal of him, and once we smoked grass together. When I asked him how people who were screwed up could become useful psychiatrists, Ron smiled and said it was part of the training. So life was fine, except the time one of the boys caught the mumps, and the rest of us were immunized with huge needles and isolated. There was a chance that the immunization shots might cause mumps to develop, but nobody got them, except me. I was in the infirmary for weeks, in bed, various parts of me swollen up like grapefruits, and meanwhile I'd contracted Desert Valley fever, which is, I gather, fairly unusual, or was then, and dangerous. My dad managed to visit once on the way to a court hearing. He must have been horrified to see me like that, but he covered nicely. I knew my mother ached to come, but couldn't because of the cost. The 2 sets of brothers who cooked and ran the kitchen took care of me, bringing my meal trays and special snacks. I think my father probably gave them some cash when he was there. The 4 of them were big, muscular, and black, and we hit it off from the beginning. When I finally recovered, I used to sneak into their room at night to look at their French postcards. They'd slip me a flashlight and the keys to the kitchen, and I'd raid the freezer, bringing back large quantities of ice cream bars and sundae cups. On Monday mornings, if they were wearing dark glasses, I figured they'd had an unusually hectic weekend, one way or another. The Breslaws were also wonderful to me in quite another fashion. Mr. Breslaw taught me how to play chess, and Mrs. Breslaw assumed the role of foster mother, caring for me and comforting me when I was sick. We developed a special relationship, and I came to love them both. Except for my infirmary stay, I felt great in Tucson. My grades were okay, my swimming improved, my asthma disappeared, and I became an excellent writer. I also learned to smoke and drink beer while I was there, thanks to a counselor who didn't last long. My folks and Roy met me at National, now Reagan Airport in D.C. My mother had put on some weight, no doubt from worrying about me, and we sat down for lunch in the airport restaurant. I lit up a cigarette and ordered a beer. Neither of my parents said a word. They were either so glad to see me or so stunned that they were speechless. Soon afterwards, I had a major asthma attack and was hospitalized overnight. I felt especially guilty later when I learned my Aunt Sel, Maggie, had helped my folks pay for my stay in Tucson. They spent years trying to pay her back, but eventually I was able to repay her. And, finally and happily, I outgrew the asthma. Recently, someone began arranging a reunion of the Brandeis School alumni 50 years or more since its heyday. So far, more than 85 people have signed up, but according to the list that's been circulated, none of them are people I remember. So I'm trying to decide whether or not to go, for old time's sake. I admit I'm torn. Ron Pose is dead, so I won't see him there, but it could be interesting if Mickey, Prussia, or Geraldine show up. I may not be able to face Mickey again, even after all these years without acknowledging her breasts. And as for the nymphette Geraldine, when I was in the infirmary, she visited me from time to time, coming up to the window beside my bed. How did she know it was my window? And offering to show me hers, if I'd show her mine. I surely would have if mine hadn't been temporarily disfigured by the mumps.